Welcome everyone to our first panel discussion, how to be productive versus busy in a reactive industry. So hopefully you noticed the holding slide that we had on when you were waiting to join. It now says Women in Hire and Access. So we've rebranded the program, so that should alleviate some confusion we've had for mentors and mentees that don't fall into the hire and rental category of membership. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to cover off some housekeeping. We'll have a Q&A active during the webinar, so if you have any questions, please post them here, and if we have time, we'll answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. We also have chat set up between attendees and the presenters during this webinar, so if you're having issues hearing or seeing the presentation, please post on the chat and we can address any issues. We have a couple of poll questions throughout the session and would appreciate your response to these, and all responses are anonymous. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you in the coming days. It's also worth noting that the webinar may not take the full hour, it just depends on the questions that we have. This is a webinar, not a meeting, so you'll only be able to see the presenters on the screen. So why this discussion topic? The nature of our industry is that in addition to long-term hire, our clients need us to react with little or no notice to their needs. This may create a chaotic environment where teams are busy, but potentially not productive. They constantly cancel plans, such as attending training or doing other important but less urgent tasks. And we've seen this with a few not being able to attend the Women in Hire workshops due to being busy. So before I introduce our panel, I want to start off with a poll question. Are you a natural planner? And so my tech support will share that with you. Well, okay, it's very similar to the last group. I expected less planners in the group. I don't know why, but anyway. So now I'm going to introduce our panel to you. First up, we have Greg Parfitt. Greg is the CEO at Orange Hire in Sydney and has been in the industry for 30 years. Next, we have Tony Lockwood, who's the National Sales and Marketing Manager at DHE? I can never say that. Also in Sydney. Tony's been in the industry for over 25 years. And finally, we have Lindsay Taranto, Business Strategy Manager with Altec. Lindsay is a relative newcomer with just over 2 years in the hire industry. Of course, you all know Elaine. So I'm going to move to the first question, which is, are you a natural planner? So Greg, what about you? Are you a planner? You're on mute.
Sorry, I first fail on the tech.
It's okay. I'm going to go to all of you.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that this week already.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think my initial answer would have been no, and I think as a human probably not, but I think over time I've probably learned to be, so relatively am now. You know, you can't really function in business without a degree of planning and getting into some good rhythm. So probably not by choice. If I was sitting on a beach somewhere, I'd forget about it pretty quickly.
Excellent. Lindsay, what about you?
Yes, I am. I'm a list person. So I have a list for everything, possibly too many, but at the end of each week, I will not shut down my laptop until I've done a few tasks. And so my lists are priority ranked. So I love planning, probably more than the execution at times.
Excellent. Right. And Tony, what about you?
Look, I'm probably fairly similar to Greg. I guess if you're looking at my early history, no, I didn't plan at all. And as it progressed in roles and getting into more kind of a management type roles, I think you've got to plan. You've got to have some level of planning. I'm still probably a little bit on the disorganized side and don't plan as much as I should. However, like Lindsay, I've got a list that I try to do every morning with, 5 or 6 items, and I try to cross those off towards the end of the day to actually feel like I've achieved something. Some days you kind of go, no, I didn't, but yes, a little bit more of a planner than I used to be, that's for sure.
Good.
You know, if I was to add to that as well, I would say same thing. I mean, lists are critical. Outlook, really making sure you've got time for the important things and understanding what your priorities are. And then locking that time away is absolutely critical, or you just do whatever hits you, and comes at you. And in this game, there's always something, so those proactive things don't get done. And then lists, and then good cycles of review and, discipline, I think, into the system somewhere.
That's the hardest part, is the discipline.
Yeah.
So how do you manage the reactive nature of the industry, Lindsay?
My role is actually quite interesting because I look at it from, in terms of this forum, I look at it in terms of the higher industry and how we operate there, and then also my role, which revolves a lot around jumping from project to project. And that could be that I'll start with my strategy role. That changes as we go. So, each month we may have something else that crops up and we need you to look at that. And that could be a full market analysis of something. So I really make sure that I have a process in place and that priorities are ranked very, very clearly, and that I communicate that with the rest of my colleagues so they know what I'm doing at any given time. And on the higher side of things, what we've discovered is that we don't have a huge fleet of equipment like I'm sure other people do, but we have trucks that go all over the country. So what we've discovered is that process is key. So we've actually mapped out the entire rental process, every single step, understood how long it should take, and we're constantly working on trying to reduce those times. So even when you get a request at the drop of a hat, we can turn around and say it's going to take this much time, and we can clearly communicate that to one another and our client. And that, I found, has really helped us be able to say, right, we know that it's going to take a couple of days for that truck to be brought back to us. So in that time, I can focus on this. And then, so we move it along like that. It's been really helpful for us.
Yeah, excellent. All right. And Greg, what about you?
Yes, so personally, I think prioritizing and really understanding what's important. And, we try and work in the business, even just sort of 3 to 5 key priorities that go out to everybody. So if anyone's ever in doubt on what they should be working on, or you've got to spare a moment, and here's the order of them. But saying that if I look across to the guys in the branches and how we try and help them, because they are living in it all day, a couple of key things. One would be a checklist, sort of daily, weekly, monthly. What are the things that must occur in this place? And then making sure that checklist actually been initialed by the person accountable. And to go with that, sort of build what we might call a responsibilities matrix. So on those key tasks and the key things that need to happen, probably 2 things. One is who's ultimately accountable, and then who's supporting that as well, because quite often there's different people participating in something, but we've tried to give ownership to someone, and they are the person that goes ultimately and puts their initials next to it to say it's completed on the daily, weekly, monthly. That stuff I've found, in particular, trying to help teams get a handle and just stop making mistakes, or stop writing a lot of credits, or stop forgetting things. And when you see, we measure the NPS, customer experience, in our business relentlessly, and the businesses that have already got their act together and who's doing what and making sure the stuff's right are scoring well. So for our industry, I think something like that is really useful.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Now we're going to talk about multitasking. So Tony, what's your view on multitasking?
Well, multitasking, I think, is really individually based. I think you've got some individuals who can do it really well, and you got others that can't. I'm a person that can't personally. I kind of get a task, and being a manager, you get pulled from different job to different job constantly. So it's something I can improve on. But you find people in your teams that can run 3 or 4 things at once and do it really well. And then you've got other people that you find in your teams that can focus on one thing at once and do it really well. And if those people try to do more than one thing at a time, sometimes the actual quality lacks and the actual, it kind of falls apart a bit. So I think it's really individually based. And then that's when you get to know your team and find out those people who can and can't do it.
Okay. And Lindsay, how do you feel about multitasking?
I did laugh at this question because I was thinking, there's the sort of cultural myth that women are better at multitasking than men. So I thought I'd just raise that anyway. But I actually don't think multitasking is actually a practical solution. Like, as Tony was saying, you are pulled in many different directions. I just find that you never really, if you're not focused on one thing at a time, then it's never going to really get done as well as it can be. That being said, it's not as if I'd only be working on one project at a time, but I think you can break down bigger projects into smaller tasks think about how long it's likely to take and really focus in on that sort of thing. I do it sometimes to the point of, for the next 10 minutes, this is all I'm doing. And I just find for me, that works a whole lot better than trying to look across a plethora of different things. It really can be a bit challenging when you've got too much stuff coming at you.
Yeah, I agree. It used to be something you put on your resume, like it was a special skill that you had, but I wouldn't do that today. Because I agree, you just can't complete one thing really well if you're doing 5 other things at the same time. So Aileen's going to run us through a multitasking activity. This is mainly for the panelists, but if anyone else wants to do it, Aileen's going to ask everybody to raise their hand when they're finished. Just non-panelists, just let us know in the chat when you're finished, because we won't be able to see you. Raise your hand.
Alrighty, so what I'm going to get you to do is, you've got on a pad in front of you, if you could draw 2 horizontal lines. And on the first line, if I can ask you to write, I am a multitasker. And on the second line, the numbers 1 through 20. And when you've completed that, if you could just raise your hand so that Dee knows that you've completed. Alrighty.
Yeah, that was 16 seconds.
Okay, so if I can ask you to do exactly the same thing again, I am a multitasker, 1 through 20, but this time, if I can ask you to write I, and then the number 1, A, and then the number 2, M, and so on.
I love the reactions when people are doing this.
Alrighty.
38 seconds.
38 seconds. So that's normally what happens. The first round is a lot quicker than the second round. There's been a lot of research on this multitasking. Multitasking, as Dee mentioned, used to be something that we would put on our CV. And we did that because we controlled a lot more of our environment then. Now, with all of the distractions that come at us, the phone, the emails, all of those sorts of things, there's been a lot of research that tells us that we can't actually do 2 cognitive things at the same time. We can multitask by running and thinking, or process and cognitive. But when you try to do 2 cognitive things at the one time, your brain doesn't like it. And the example of what you've just done is typical in our workplaces. So Tony, I was reflecting when you were saying about some people who are really good at it. And I was thinking, wow, I wonder how good they would be if they didn't do it.
No.
Interesting. All right, thank you for that, guys. Thanks for demonstrating.
Thanks, Aileen. So, Greg, what role does managing expectations, both client and internal, play in reacting to their needs?
I think it's very important because you always have some limitations, and so I think I would say it's critical in our industry because everyone wants everything yesterday. We sort of solve problems for customers who are disorganized. I think from the operators and from most of the people in the jobs they do, which are required to be reactive to those things, but also have businesses pulling them, be very realistic. And I always say either build some sort of contingency. Personally, if I've got something that's important to do, I always set myself a goal in front of when I need to. So if I do blow out. And then obviously the priorities in the business overall. I would say in our business, I would want people to put the customer first. But then also within that, you've got realism, what you can do, communicate clearly. If something goes wrong, be very honest very quickly. So you don't wait until they contact you. You need to know it's gone wrong. You need to inform them and you need to be honest. And once again, even the correcting it, allow yourself a little bit more time than you think so. You're not, do the classic overpromise and, over-deliver and under-promise, I think would be the key things. And then inside the business, if you've got a boss, and a lot of people do that, sometimes ask for different things when they've already asked for things and your time is pretty much taken up. I would say, you know, try and have a conversation about, here's where I'm at and what are the priorities, and which would you like me to do first, and try and get clarity around that. I think it's always important that you understand what is important and what people expect of you. It's once again probably comes down to planning, being very clear about what you need to do, be realistic about your time, allow a buffer, be honest in your communication, and be proactive about the way you communicate about these challenges, rather than getting, you know, just caught trying to please everybody. And then I guess my last thing would be kind to yourself, and don't let it overwhelm you. And I mean, it sounds terrible, but it's only work, you know, and that should never come first, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. Tony, how do you feel about it?
I don't know if there's anything left to say. Greg just said it all. He's done a very good job answering that. No, I agree with Greg 100% in what he said. It's you know, you got to give yourself realistic goals. You got to be, honesty is the biggest thing, I think, when it comes down to it. If, you know, if you are, as an employee, given too much work and you're not going to be able to meet the timeframes that you're given because you just can't physically do it, you just got to be upfront, honest with it, and say, look, I'm going to fail, or I'm not going to meet the timelines. And it comes down to your customers as well. You know, if you're going to tell your customer, for example, you're going to be there in 2 hours, well, you be there in 2 hours. And if you are finding a delay of some sort or whatever it might be upfront, be ahead of the game. Before they ring you, you ring them and let them know you've got a problem. And that's kind of managing their expectations as well. So I think honesty is a massive with that one.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, thank you. So now we're going to show you an image. It's going to show what busy looks like and what productive looks like. And what we want to know is which one of these looks most like your world now. So there'll be another poll question. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, very different to the last session. It was 50-50 for the last group. I think I'd have to agree with the busy personally at the moment versus productive. So panel, how do you motivate your team to be productive versus busy? Greg, start with you. No, you're on mute. Sorry.
As I mentioned before, I think the having some clear understanding of what you are accountable for is a good starting point, and then having some basic checklists that make sure those things get done. You know, and then on top of that, really, I think a lot of teamwork. You know, if you're not getting there, hopefully you've got a teammate who's honest enough to call you out, or even nice enough to put their hand out and help you. But I think it comes down to knowing what you're accountable for, make sure people do, and then, you know, having the time, and then basic, just a diary. If you're not using Outlook, something that the stuff that you know you have to do, you block time, and then just a little bit of discipline around that time.
Yeah. Lindsay, what about you?
So similar to what Tony said after following, I don't want to answer questions after Greg anymore. He answers them all. I think all of that. I also think it's about the culture that you create or that you are part of in a workplace. I have worked in a workplace before where there was a culture of, you know, if you stay late, if you're at your desk, if you don't take breaks and all that sort of stuff, that was encouraged. And I'm afraid I rebelled against that because it's just, my brain couldn't take it. So I've always made a point of trying to make sure that I take breaks when I'm supposed to, and that my team does the same thing, because, you know, similar to someone turning up sick at work. I mean, I now know that's extremely topical right now, but you know, you don't want that person burnt out. Work shouldn't be the number one thing in your life. And I think, you know, about being productive, you've typically got 8 to 9 to 10 hours in a work day. Use them effectively. And when you go home, you want to be turning your laptop off, you want to be switching your phone off. And obviously we can't do that in the higher industry, that's not always possible, but really not rewarding that sort of bad behavior of trying to constantly be busy, but really putting things in place. And I think one of the things, you know, those sort of milestones, being able to have your team recognize that it's great to achieve a milestone, and in such a way that you as a manager can see those, whatever that system might be, you know, a booking system, a reporting system. I think that really just helps people become more and more productive.
Excellent, thank you. So if your resources are tight, how do you choose where to use them, Tony?
Oh, I think all of us running businesses that are always running, you know, we're always running our fine line with our resources on, we're never over resourced, put it that way, I think, in our game. And it comes down to prioritizing, I guess. You've got to be able to know what priorities are actually critical. And just in time frames, again, this is talking to your from a strategy point of view, from a customer point of view, management point of view. You just need to know what things have to happen when. Again, goes back into planning, making lists, setting yourself goals for the day. And then when you look at your resources and you just say, okay, this has to be done today. So who's available, what time? We've all got, as Lindsay said, you know, we've got 8 or 10 hours a day of working time. How much time per task is going to be required, and actually just using it and planning effectively. After that, you know, you've got to, if you know you're running really short, then you got to look at maybe some external reasons or external help, and then just utilizing it as best as you can.
So what role does technology play in productivity?
For me?
Yeah, we'll go to you.
Oh, yes, technology is massive. I guess it's, you know, I guess if you bring it back to the whole COVID thing at the moment, you look at all of us at the moment saying, you know, we're all with technology, and you're all online doing this today, for example. You know, without this, we couldn't be doing this right now in the current situation. So, but from a point where I manage a team nationally, obviously it gives me the opportunity to keep in touch with my team in a face-to-face manner still, which obviously drives productivity. You get a lot more out of your team when you can actually have those one-on-one conversations in somewhat person. Even though we're not physically in person, we're still having see the emotions and the actual feeling of the person online. So yeah, I think it's crucial to what we do with productivity. Again, you know, with everything we do from a higher industry, you know, from managing assets, all that kind of stuff, it's all very developed now compared to where it was 20 years ago, you might say. Yeah, so the technology side of the business, it obviously helps. But, you know, I guess if you're using planning technology, you know, it helps you with your throughput. Yeah, it has a massive effect on our day-to-day life.
Thanks. Lindsay, what are your thoughts on this?
Actually, I thought about this from the individual point of view, and I think that while we have systems in place within each of our workplaces, the way that we use technology to make us more productive as individuals, I think, is very subjective. I find, like I said before, I have lists, and I actually have pen and paper because I find that using my sense of touch and sight actually makes things stick with me more. Whereas if I just have things popping up, technology, I kind of treat it like the 4,000 emails I get every day, and, you know, might miss something. So I think it's very important to, as an individual, understand what works for you. And I think we all know that the more senses that you use, the more you learn. And I think that the same is with productivity. So whatever works for you, but keep in mind that with technology, we are constantly bombarded with a whole lot of different stimulus these days. So it would probably be best to find something pretty simple and stick with it. Yeah, there's a million squillion tools out there that you can use, but and it's worth taking the time to test a few out and see what works for you.
Thank you. Now, Greg, I'm really sorry. I skipped you in the last question. So feel free to answer both questions.
Okay, the resources are tight. I think Tony pretty much said it all in, you've got to prioritize. And I think the business needs to have, clear, even cultural kind of guidelines as to what's important here. And then it makes it easier for people to make calls on the run. And then obviously above that kind of guideline, there's probably, what's the impact of what's going on and what's either the loss or the opportunity cost or the gain, trying to make calls on the run. And I think, I think if there's some sort of framework that exists in the business in particular, as Lindsay said too, culture plays a part in this stuff. It's important in prioritizing, and then communication and a bit of leadership is useful at these times too. I would say on technology, and at least it's a noisy thing. I'm not really I don't have much social media existence at all, which is kind of handy. So the computers work for me mostly. I think some basic tools, some of the, just Outlook calendars is terrific. I mean, I don't think any of us would function without it, frankly. And some people don't really utilize that, so that would be a starting point. I agree that I've sort of got lists in places, and I'm very fortunate. I've got an EA which who really ultimately, probably is fair to say, slaps me into shape on a regular basis in what I should be doing. But I also do sort of start a day with a list of things that I know. Quite often, it could be even sort of started the day before when I haven't completed stuff. And then I do like paper. I write everything. So I'm still of that, maybe it's my generation, I don't know. It's a lot quicker to write than type, and it's just easy. It's more real when it's there. But just basic, I think for everyone on the call, if you can get Outlook going for you and you can get it connected to your phone, you can get a few reminders and all those things just make life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, but I'm with you. I have to write everything down. Best way to remember something is to write it down. So this last question is for everybody. Is there a tale you can share when there was a productivity lesson you learned? Lindsay.
Yeah, my example isn't necessarily industry related, but I think it can be quite poignant because so we had set up a boat manufacturing company, and we were finding that the market for this boat that we wanted to sell was quite small, but we had all this fiberglassing capability within the manufacturing facility. So the idea was to come up with new products that we could offer. And we had these guys saying, oh, you can produce anything from a Star Wars helmet, true story, I have one, to a bus shelter, fiberglass. And they had all these ideas, but they couldn't put a market or a customer to the idea. So what we realized is that while they were brainstorming, they weren't actually addressing the day-to-day operations of the business. So we processed mapped the entire operation and realized that out of all of their things, to address customers, to fulfill orders, to do everything, they had a certain amount of time each week to be able to brainstorm. And then I had to teach them how to come up with a product and then identify the market, identify the competition. And we practiced this. I'd meet with them once a week for the first 2 months of this. And within the first month, they were already improving. And by the end of the second month, they had some really great ideas. Their day-to-day operations had improved drastically as well, because as they began to realize how much time certain steps were taking, they were focused on really reducing that. So things like automation came in and all that sort of stuff. So I will always preach to the benefits of a process map and understanding how each thing works. And with that, they got so much more done in their days and ended up coming up with a couple of interesting products that did sell at the end. So it was a great story.
Thank you. Tony, what about you?
Yeah, so I'll go back to a fair few years ago, and it's a tough question, to be honest, to try to think of a specific time, but the one that I think of is back when I was in the Access game, and we actually had a month where we ran really high utilization, and we ran our fleet for that month at approximately 93% for the whole month, which it's fantastic when you think about it. But what we found out at the end of it was actually we worked a lot harder and actually made less profit at the end. So we did all this extra work. We ran the fleet, 10% higher than we would at the end of the day, and yet we ran less profits. We all worked harder for less. So it actually made a point of us going back and actually really breaking down, as Lindsay said, basically stepping out the processes of what we do on a day-to-day basis from a truck point of view to a service point of view, how the machines are running around the yard, and where we could actually fine tune things to actually be able to still make money. And it kind of just identified the areas that we weren't being as efficient as we could be. So it actually broke down, like the yard, for example. We changed the layout of the yard for the machines that were kind of coming back off the trucks to the machines that were ready to go out the next day. And it actually just let us identify areas that we needed to streamline to just give us better efficiencies for everyone. And that flowed down to the bottom line. When you look at time, we all have the same amount of time every day. So it's how we maximize our utilization of that time. And that's what we found. So it was a good outcome from a bad month, basically. It definitely identified some areas that we could be more productive, pull more productivity out of the workshop and our teams, and provide us a better result.
Excellent. Thank you. Greg, what about, take yourself off mute first. Thank you.
I don't have a definitive single example, but I would say that the people I work for at the moment, it was coming to work here was really refreshing, because they're very big, and they've taught me a lot of lessons around execution. And there's an old saying, execution eats strategy for breakfast. And really, if you want to get stuff done, and I guess that's one of the things I'd say, what is my advice to you is do stuff. Know what your priorities are, but, spend more time doing than thinking, planning, just do. And you probably make some mistakes. And in this business, these guys they're very happy. I think they'd be disappointed if you weren't messing some things up and making mistakes, because they like to drive a fast pace. And then to ensure that happens, make sure you've kind of got a plan you're working to, but there's a lot of holding people accountable, holding yourself accountable. And as I said, if in doubt, do something. Don't stop and don't overthink it, and don't question yourself too many times. And get a lot of things done, and then a lot of them will be hopefully the right stuff. And if you've made a few mistakes, you've done stuff. And I've found in that environment to be, I think it's a nice place to work. There's a lot of energy, getting stuff done, and people aren't overthinking stuff in the bleeding obvious. And a lot of the businesses we're in, we either have stuff to do that doesn't add value, or we spend a lot of time talking about, or trying to get approval for the bleeding obvious. Try to get the pace going where people understand what's important, and it's easy to identify that it's a good idea to do it. So that's the best I've got, is just, do whatever you can to get a good pace going into what's happening.
May I please ask Greg a question on that, if you don't mind, Dee?
Sure.
Greg, you did mention something there about doing, rather doing than overthinking. And, I think possibly we've spent a bit of time in the workforce. So for us, that's probably easier in a way for us to take that initiative. But if you think about yourself 2 years into your career, and you having a thought of, I really want to do this, what advice would you give to yourself at that age, at that level?
It's a good question. It's a great question. Start off by picking a good boss, I guess. But I think you've got to have a little think about why it's good. And if you understand what's important in the business, and if you can put like 3 lines together as to why it's a good idea to get someone's support, would be handy. I think that's the starting point in getting some confidence, because I think we are working within parameters, and if you do want to change something, or you are going to do something risky, you probably need approval. And to do that, you might want to build a small case. And it's always a case of follow the money, so to speak. Is this a good idea, and can we benefit? And then trying to get that down simply. For the leaders on the business, I would say, I think it's important. And one of the questions I got asked quite early with quite a big move here was, what's the worst that can happen? And I think it's a good question to ask yourself if in doubt. And people often always sort of mention, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So if anything, I guess maybe go out on a little bit of a limb. Most business owners in particular, not necessarily managers, but business owners really like people to take their own, use their own kind of intuition and to back themselves, because that's what they've done.
I think you're right, Greg. And I think if you're an employee, or you're a person going out and you've got all the right reasons behind you, and you kind of what you have a good explanation for why you're doing what you're doing. I don't think anybody's ever going to scold you for that. You know, if you've shown that it's a, you know, it's a benefit for the business, the customer, and X, Y, and Z, I think you got all the right reasons behind it. I don't think anybody's ever going to get mad at you for giving it a go.
Yeah, and even if it fails.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any?
I do like that idea though of just jotting a couple of lines of what it is. I wonder whether that's a part that's missing for some people. They think it, they may do it and get in trouble for it, but potentially just a couple of lines to
Do some research.
Yeah.
Just research the benefit of why you want to do it.
Yeah, and even the benefit of learning how to put a little business case together. As small as, I think that's a great skill for especially people on the line, and it often saves time because people can make decisions with the information. Good.
We've also had a note in the chat. Tim Nettle says, think about what you would do if it was your money and do that. That's Diana Mitchell wants to know what the third option between busy and productive is. So maybe chaos, pure chaos. I think that's
Pretending to be busy.
the only other option, unfortunately. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add or any questions? We still have quite a bit of time if there's more you want to talk about.
I think when they talk about busy versus, you know, I think there's always that efficiency over effectiveness. You know, we can all be busy and not get anything done. So it's actually about being busy and actually achieving something at the end of the day, like with the lists we're talking about and stuff, and giving yourself goals per day, per week, per month, per year, whatever it might be, personal or work-related goals. I think everybody, it's a good habit to get into, of being able to start your day or whatever it is and make a list and just tick them off. And it, not only does it make you feel like you've achieved something, and that gives you a little bit of gratification when you actually get to cross it off the list. I know when I get to cross something off, I kind of get excited. So it's, you know, I think that's a good little way about going about it.
So we have another question for the panel. Do you all have a strategic business plan, and how often do you update it?
I'd be happy to start with that one. It's square in my wheelhouse, I suppose. We do, and you would find that most, from a just kind of best practice point of view, your strategic business plan is either over 1, 3, or 5 years, so short, medium, long term. And within that short term, within that year, best practice, you should be updating that every quarter. What you might find is in circumstances like we're in now with the coronavirus, you would have, and you always try and have an element of reliability. So when you're doing any kind of forecasting, any kind of predictions, you'd be saying, I reckon there's going to be an error of whatever it is, 2%, 5%. With the coronavirus, it's just completely off the wall. So you'd probably at this stage be looking at that business plan every quarter very, very closely, but I think possibly even monthly, you know, just check in, see how things are going. And sometimes when someone would say to me, oh, we've got to redo our business plan, it can seem really overwhelming. But the quickest thing to do is just to do a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And if anything has fundamentally changed in your SWOT analysis from month to month, that's a very key sign that you need to think about how you have to pivot your business or change it. But if nothing much has changed, then it's just about keeping tabs on things.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is there anybody else that has a question or a comment? No? Okay. Well, then that concludes the webinar today. Thank you, Aileen, Greg, Tony, and Lindsay. And thank everyone for attending. Thank you for my HRIA tech support team in the boardroom. The next session will be on Tuesday, the 22nd of September. The topic is emotional intelligence. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Mentors.